Hello. Hi. Hello, everybody. Hello, a big welcome to everybody who's joined us today. It's so great to see a full house. We are very excited to start off our discussion on how positive is nature positive really. So today, to have this conversation, it's largely going to be a conversation where we are hoping young people can understand a bit better, given the newness, given the fact that nature positive is a concept that has come up quite recently and hasn't given young people much time to really acknowledge and acquaint themselves with this concept in a holistic manner. And since we are always the voice of reason in these spaces, we wanted to hold this conversation with all of you so that we could, create the space so we can learn better about this concept, but also ask some of our questions about it as well. So with that, I would love to invite our amazing panelists to join us on stage. I would like to first start by inviting Mirna Inez Fernandez, who's the co-coordinator of the policy team from the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. So thank you so much, Mirna. Please join us. I would next call upon Steve from IUCN to please join us on stage as well. Next, I would like to invite Archana Surong, who's the member of the Youth Advisory Group to the Secretary General on climate change. I would now like to invite Gavin on stage from WWF. Next, I would like to invite Aisha Siddiqui, who's part of Polluters Out and a youth climate activist, to join us on stage. I would like to invite Michael from Business for Nature to also join us on stage. And our last but definitely not the least of our most amazing panelists, I would like to invite Elena Gwalinga, also from Polluters Out and a climate activist, to please join on stage. So thank you so much for all of you to take some time out to be a part of this conversation. I know that this COP is an extremely busy COP, so we really acknowledge the fact that you've taken out your time to be a part of this discussion today. So I would like to start off by actually starting with some opening remarks from our panelists. And one of the questions we would love to ask our panelists here, maybe starting with Stephen, is what does it really mean? What does nature positive mean to IUCN? And maybe he could explain a bit about their perspective to us.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay in the back? Bit challenging in this venue. Thanks everybody for coming, and thanks very much for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be here, and very much of the spirit and culture of IUCN, and I'm sure our broader community and constituency is seeking dialogue and discussion. And so that's a really a keystone of who we are and what we value moving forward. And so very pleased to be here, and very pleased to share some thoughts and reflections and challenges that are being faced. Before answering or attempting to answer from an institutional perspective, I'd actually really rather start off my observations from a personal perspective, which is that the situation we're in right now regarding biodiversity and nature is dire. The need for responses is urgent, and so action needs to be taking place now, pretty much wherever we can get it from. And so for me personally, what I'm seeking is ways that we can contribute at individual levels, at family levels, at community levels, at business levels, at country levels, to finding a way to bend the curve of the loss of biodiversity and put us onto a better trajectory in terms of nature and nature survival. From an institutional perspective, IUCN is working on a definition of what is nature positive that will be put out for a consultation process, so there will be ample opportunity to share and reflect upon that. But the gist of it is similar to what I was saying. Is we need to be seeking to improve the situation of biodiversity on the planet towards a global target, and moving in that direction together, all of us, and making those contributions as we can. But we also need to pay very close attention to addressing the impacts that are coming towards nature. And so we can't try and leapfrog over those negative impacts and consider that positive things that we're doing is anywhere near sufficient or appropriate. We need to follow an important process here. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to now move on to Michael, who can also share their perspective from Business for Nature.
Thank you very much, Sweta. And I think it's really great looking at the panel here that we have business, NGOs, and the youth constituency, IPOCs, all together to discuss this very important issue. Because I think coming into this COP, the whole concept of nature positive has really risen and bubbled to the top as one of the key issues that needs to be understood by all stakeholders. My name is Michael Ofusuhine-Wise. I work with Business for Nature, and Business for Nature, just to set the scene, is a global coalition of around 78 partners from business organizations, but also some conservation organizations. And together we're working with leading companies to advocate for ambitious policies on nature, as well as concrete action. I just wanted to sense check in the room if anyone has had the Made It Mandatory campaign. If you've been here for a couple of days, has anyone, just by a show of hands, you've heard the MIM Make It Mandatory campaign? Yeah, so this is a collective effort from Business for Nature and our partners to really work with companies to call on governments to make it mandatory to disclose their impact and dependency. So just bringing to life some of the work that we've been doing on here. But to come to the question, what nature positive actually means, I think coming into this, we did some work trying to help the companies to understand this, because it's also a question that companies are grappling with very seriously. And the message that was coming out of that exercise on the paper, the discussion paper, which was launched in October leading up to the climate COP, but also here, was that we needed a North Star. What are we all working towards? Right? In the same vein that we're in the climate conversations, we have the 1.5 degree target, we have net zero, something that's aspirational, that gives us a direction of travel. And I think that language is very important, a direction of travel, which means it's going to take us some time to get there. It's not going to happen next week, it's not going to happen next 2 weeks, but a direction of travel where we all rally behind. Right? So the concept of nature positive is really that signal. And I just want to emphasize that this is a whole society signal. It's not a signal for just the youth. It's not just a signal for business. It's not a signal for non-state actors, but it's a signal for all of us, including us sitting here today in this room, to say this is where we're working towards, and something that we all need to find, inspiration and ownership in contributing towards. So if you ask me what nature positive means, and I think from an organizational point of view, this is a North Star that we are all looking to contribute to. And I think going into the conversation, we'll be able to get into the details of how do we actually get there, because we know the devil is always in the detail. And I think we need to make sure that we're working together as a whole society, not as individuals, towards this goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michael. I think that was quite helpful for us to get your views on. Since right now we are still trying to understand this concept better, I would like to jump to Gavin so that he can give us his side as well before we go into our conversation. Yeah. Thank you, Gavin.
Great, thanks, Sweta, and thanks to Gibbon for pulling us together today. Huge audience, which is fantastic, and looking forward to a really good discussion here. I think Michael and Steve have covered a little bit of it already in terms of the origin of Nature Positive. I want to add a few points as well, which is when Nature Positive was developed a couple of years ago, it was a search for not only that North Star or Southern Cross, depending on where you are in the world, but also something that's going to be very clear, very inspiring as well. Nature's equivalent to the 1.5 degrees. 1.5 degrees coming out, well below 2 degrees, and 1.5 degrees coming out of the Paris Agreement has helped rally the world around in a certain direction. Not nearly enough. A whole lot more work to do there. But nevertheless, we know where we need to be, and we know where we're falling short. the feeling is that that was missing for nature and had to be developed, and so it was. Since then, it's taken off as a concept. It's been embraced by many different corners of society. More than 350 organizations have signed on to a call to action, including indigenous voices, youth organizations, development humanitarian groups, and faith organizations as well, all calling for a nature-positive world. And many more organizations also calling for the mission of the Global Biodiversity Framework to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030 for a nature-positive world as well. This is quite a radical idea, to actually halt and reverse nature within a decade. In fact, a few days ago, a New Scientist article came out and questioned whether it's actually possible to halt and reverse nature loss that fast. The response to that from the academic community was phenomenal. More than 400 academics have rallied in the last days and said, it is absolutely necessary that we stop the decline of nature and we restore nature as fast as we can. And we have to be able to look at 2030 as the goal in order to rally action today. We can't delay an action. Action needs to start today. Now, also for the global goal of nature positive, it is really important that we think about the drivers of biodiversity loss as well. As important as some of the discussions here are on spatial conservation and 30 by 30, we as WWF have some deep fears that we're going to come out of here, out of the Global Biodiversity Framework, with some very weak language and action around drivers. Now, we know drivers are absolutely key to reversing nature loss. You can't get to 2030 goals or later without much more action on drivers, predominantly the agriculture sector, but also fisheries, forestry, infrastructure, extractive industries as well. There has to be a wholesale reform of how we do business. And again, that's what the global goal is for. It's a global goal that everybody has to contribute to. If companies are falling short in their contributions to it, we need to be able to call that out as well. We need to be able to call out greenwashing. So therefore, it's really important to have that clear goal of where we'd like to be and where we'd like to get to as well. Perhaps lastly, just to say that there will be some new tools on the way to help businesses. The Science-Based Targets Network will publish full guidance next year, and that is going to be a real tall order for companies to embrace and begin to reform the way they do business so that we can start putting nature on a path to recovery. So too for the financial sector, and the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosure is really pushing. Both TNFD and SBTN are also embracing nature positive as their guiding principle as well. So we're starting to see this rallying of the private sector towards, as Michael said, contributing to this global goal for nature. There's also been some really important business advice out there from the business sector saying, don't make claims that you are nature positive at this point. There's no kind of basis for those claims as well. Only talk about your contributions to and start thinking about how you're going to do business differently in the weeks and months and years ahead as well. So lastly, just to say, nature positive shouldn't be seen in isolation. It's only possible alongside a net zero world and a world that is more equitable as well. And these agendas are linked. We have to move on all three at the same time if we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. That's one of the big milestones there. And so working on these common and linked agendas, we couldn't have an oil company, for example, saying I'm nature positive over here, but also completely undermining our ability to reach a 1.5 degree pathway. So that is something to watch out for as well. But my last point is my first one. Nature positive is inspiring. We need to inspire action. We need to mainstream the idea that we can reverse biodiversity loss. Nature positive is one, but not the only way of doing that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gavin, and thank you for the panelists till now to give us an overarching understanding of the concept and an understanding of where it's coming from. I would like to now move to Elena. As an indigenous youth activist, I want to hear from you, how are you seeing, what you're hearing today, but also with connection to your relationship with your land, and what do you really need to defend it?
Thank you, Shweta, and thank you all for being here. My name is Elena Walinga. I come from an indigenous community in the Ecuadorian Amazon. I'm an indigenous rights defender, and we work around everything that has to do with land protection and indigenous lands against extractive industries. Um, for me, my relationship to the land, it comes from my culture and my identity of being a Quechua woman. It's how we've been raised, and it's the relationship and the life that we lead out in the rainforest with nature that has shaped me and shaped my work. And I think that when we are talking about biodiversity, we are not sometimes really understanding the complexity of these ecosystems, such as the Amazon rainforest where I come from. And that knowledge, unfortunately, is a knowledge that only has been able to stay alive within indigenous communities because of the deep relationship that we have had, and because of the life that we have led in these ecosystems. In the knowledge that we are still obtaining from our elders, and by everyday working the land and by being there, I think that is what is crucial to these conversations. I don't think we can see the entire picture if we're not including that knowledge, and if that knowledge is not at the center of the conversation. Because if it's not, we're walking into the wrong direction. Because then the language that we're using, it doesn't apply on the ground. And that is what's been the problem many times in climate talks, in a lot of different negotiations when it comes to our territories. And for me, what I was talking about earlier when it comes to my identity and my relationship to nature, in my community, we have this philosophy called the living forest. And the living forest, well, I say philosophy because that's the way it's easiest translated into English, but it's a way of seeing the world, and it's a way of experiencing the world. And we see nature as a living being, and we see it not just as a living organism, but as a living being with a spirit. And that's what makes the entire difference for us, because when we're talking about rivers, we're talking about a being that is equal to us. I think that sometimes is easily translated into, we can compare human rights to rights of nature, for example. As of why these beings should be subject to law and why they should have rights. But it's that deep connection and that deep knowledge of being to recognize that these are living beings that make these places irreplaceable to us in a spiritual way, for our livelihoods, for our cultures. And ultimately, it's that type of mindset, that type of philosophy and livelihood that has protected biodiversity for thousands and thousands and thousands of years on indigenous territories. And we often talk about the 80% of world's biodiversity being on indigenous lands, and indigenous people are 5% of the world's population. There is a correlation between that and those type of mindsets and worldviews. So if if these cultures disappear, then we will definitely see an increase in biodiversity loss, and then we will start to walk in the wrong direction again. I'll continue later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elena. I would like to now move to Aisha, also as an indigenous youth activist, and coming from the climate space. I wanted to hear your view from what you're hearing on today. We are taking a lot of ideas and wisdom from the climate movement, and maybe I would like to hear from you on your perspective of where these solutions land, and how have you seen them impact the climate so far, whether it's the solutions that you're seeing, the real ones, or even the false ones.
Thank you so much, and thank you guys for being here. I just wanted to clarify that I come from a tribal community, and my relationship to my land is different than Helena's relationship to her land, is different than the Canadian youth that are here, is different than North America. And to be native from Pakistan means something different than those of people who are protecting the rainforest. I've been working in the climate space for 5 years, and in the climate space at least, the conversation often, as young people, as an activist, as somebody who was also raised with the idea that the earth is a living being, we, for the longest, are catching up to false solutions and trying to make them not harmful anymore. I think it is incredible that at this stage, at the biodiversity space at least, we are discussing a solution before it is impacted and put in text, because it's critical to think about the words nature positive before they become part of the GBF. Consultation is wonderful, but if consultation is applied after something becomes law, then that consultation will also always be trying to catch up to already established policies. Now, the other thing that Gavin, Mark, all of you guys mentioned was we want something inspiring. We want something equivalent to net zero for the biodiversity space. Countries for the past 27 years that climate has been, the conversations on climate that have been going, have put in net zero policies in their NDCs. In 2015, around Paris, that was one of the victories speaking. But those net zero policies did not come to fruition. And 7 years later, nation states are heading towards a 2.3 degree world as opposed to a 1.5 degree world, because net zero, net loss was not properly defined. And when there is not a definition that can be measurable scientifically, legally, then it is very difficult to hold corporations, businesses, NGOs, even communities accountable. And that what happens is then you are constantly trying to catch up to something. In the climate space, in the biodiversity space, if there's one thing that's clear, it's that we're running out of time. And I think that is acknowledged by all of us. If we put in place mechanisms that will actually cause us to lose even more time, because afterwards we don't know how much damage we have caused, then we have even less time to make up for the biodiversity loss in the conversation of net positive. The understanding is net positive will set in at year 2030. But for the next 8 years, there will be a net loss of biodiversity. Helena can explain this, I can explain this, perhaps even Archana can explain this. Once a species is lost, especially from the river community that I come from, for example, mangroves, you can plant new mangroves, you can plant baby mangroves, but they will not make up for the species that has been lost. They will not make up for the ecosystems that have been lost. It will take years, and it takes very, very careful cultivation, and it takes stewardship, and it takes time. And offsetting biodiversity, offsetting species loss, animals loss, plant loss, it's not as simple as this inspiring call. It needs more clarity. And if there's any place that we spend time on clarity and I guess bureaucracy, it is the COPs. So that is my opinion from the climate space. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would love to now move on to Archana. Archana is a member of the Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group. And as an Indigenous person, what is your perspective on biodiversity conservation and how can IPLCs lead the stewardship?
Hello. Johar, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here interacting with you all. For me, as a young Indigenous woman, nature is a source of identity, culture, tradition, language, and livelihood. Unlike other communities who see nature as a commercial commodity. For us, Indigenous people, in our worldview, we are not mere part of nature. We are nature. And today we are here at COP15 of Biodiversity Conference, where there is negotiation about nature, forest, and biodiversity. I truly believe and advocate that it has to be human rights-based approach in the global biodiversity framework and as we go ahead in terms of biodiversity conservation and climate action. I think it's really critical to have this in the mission and the targets of post 2030 global biodiversity framework. And I say this because we have seen the biodiversity loss. We have seen the impacts of climate crisis, and we have seen the loss of our identity, culture, tradition, and language. It is all intertwined, and we no longer can afford to do this. And I strongly believe that we all need to come together, and today I here seek your solidarity and support for human rights-based approach as we go ahead for biodiversity conservation and policies. Because we Indigenous people, local communities, young people, women and girls should be leaders of biodiversity conservation, climate action, and not victims of biodiversity policies and climate policies. And I think it's really critical to also understand that on ground, we see a lot of proposals in the name of nature-based solution, nature positive, and other alternatives in terms of biodiversity conservation and climate policies also. But without taking the consideration, without doing consultation with Indigenous people, local communities, without taking their free prior informed consent, without recognizing the rights of Indigenous people and local communities over the land, forests, and territories, we see that it is further marginalizing them. It is further victimizing them. It is further making them vulnerable. We see that communities are under the threat of eviction, land grabbing, displacement, and migration because of these solutions and because of these proposals. And today, I urge you all that we need to reconsider this. We need to emphasize this because this is going on in a vicious circle, both in the climate space and here. Non-recognition of rights of Indigenous people over their land, forest, and territories is making them more vulnerable to eviction, land grabbing, and displacement, which is again leading to loss of identity, culture, and tradition, which is also enabling coming up of initiatives in their land, which is again imposition of different worldviews, developmental worldviews, rather than enabling their own culture, tradition, and their solutions. So I feel it's really critical for us to emphasize on preservation and protection of biodiversity, natural forest, natural ecosystem, natural biodiversity, and not frame policies which is focusing on compensation, which is focusing on artificial forest, artificial biodiversity, because the biodiversity lost, the nature lost, the forest lost cannot be compensated because it's our life, it's our identity, And at the end of the day, we all need to come together. We all need to work together because it's not only indigenous communities who are facing the biodiversity loss. It's each one of us. We need to protect our earth. We need to protect our ecosystem. We need to protect our biodiversity. And I seek your support to advocate for human rights based approach for global biodiversity framework and biodiversity conservation, and we can do it together right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Archana. I would like to now move on to Mirna. Mirna being our policy co-coordinator, I would like to hear, like, from you have heard this the term for the longest time. You've heard from our panelists who have so graciously explained to us some of the concepts and ideas behind it. Could you let us know how you have what you've heard from young people and what your ideas are? What do you think some of the concerns are coming from young people on this?
Thank you so much, Sweta. First, I want to say that we are part of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, which is the youth participation mechanism in the CBD. So for us, it is very important that we truly represent the voices of our community because it comes from more than 50 national chapters and regional chapters in all the world regions, more than 300 youth organizations that are members, and we have a reach of almost 1 million, I think, young people in social media. So it is very important for us that we represent the voices of our community. For us, it's also very important that we come from an informed position because it has happened for too long that concepts are somehow imposed on young people without proper capacity development. That is what we call youth washing. That is having young people implement things in the best faith without really understanding. So for us, it was very important to understand all these things. Nature positive was something that we don't understand. We did not understand. Many of our young people never heard of the concept. I never heard of the concept before. Like I think I heard from it this year. Uh, so when we try to understand, to explain to our community, we realize that it's a working definition. No, as Stefan said, an IUCN it's a working definition. We see a definition from WWF. We see a definition that is being pushed as a global target in the JBF that has 15 organizations proposing it. But we don't understand which is the definition that is going to be used. We see nature positive being proposed in the mission, in Target 11, in Section H, but we don't understand which definition is this. And if it's going to secure the rights-based approaches that we always say that need to be at the core and the heart of the JBF. The two words that make this concept somehow worries us because nature, I would say along with green, is one of the words that have been used for greenwashing the most. You can go to the supermarket and you will find all kinds of natural products or organic or green that are not really that. I think, and we saw from experience that many times big polluters take advantage of this lack of clarity for greenwashing. As opposed to the concept of biodiversity that is clearly defined on the CBD, biodiversity and its components, biodiversity of species, diversity of ecosystems, and the genetic biodiversity and the services it provides to people, the benefits it provides to people, it's clearly defined in the text of the convention. So that's why we are the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, because we want to advocate for all of this. And around the term positive, we also have some concerns because we realize from research that net approaches, all the relative approaches, net gain, neutral, positive, net zero, no net gain, all of these concepts are more of the result of a mathematical exercise somehow, or they have been used this way since the 70s. it is a way in which companies can justify further destruction of nature or further emissions on carbon in case of carbon offsetting. So they just do this mathematical exercise of, okay, I'm going to deplete 30 hectares of forest here, but I'm going to do a reforestation project of 40 hectares there, and the final balance is going to be plus 10, so it's positive. And I know that this is not how it's being proposed, and this is not the concept that the organizations behind Nature Positive have, but we're very worried that the implementers are going to misunderstand and are going to misuse the the lack of clarity. I'm going to misuse the concept because of the lack of clarity it has already. Um, this opens the door for a lot of biodiversity offsetting, and as by biodiversity global movement, youth movement, we have serious concerns about biodiversity offsetting because we all come from the idea that ecosystems and the benefits they provide to people cannot be replaced once they are lost. And it's more than a belief, it's something that we have seen. All of us come from different ecosystems. We have been talking about this. I come from Bolivia. In 2019, we lost an unbelievable amount of the Amazon rainforest and also some other ecosystems due to the forest fires. We lost a very significant portion of the Chiquitano dry forest. Maybe not any of you have heard of this ecosystem because this is an endemic ecoregion to Bolivia. So no other country has this type of ecosystem. When we lost this ecosystem due to the forest fires, or a very significant portion of this ecosystem, we realized that we had species that were not even known to science. So we cannot even restore, we cannot even start to think about how do we restore if we didn't know which species we had in these ecosystems. The science of ecological restoration is very new, and we are still not sure if we are going to be able to restore the ecosystems that we are already losing. And it will take ages and ages to bring back all the ecosystem functions and ecosystem integrity that we are losing already, and we really don't have more time. So we will be worried of an approach that would give the window to keep the destruction of nature until 2030, and from 2030 onwards, we will be able to have a positive result of compensation mechanisms of this nature that is lost in this decade. And that's what worries us the most. Michael said something that maybe all of us agree with. We need a travel direction. And it's very important for us to have a travel direction, but we're very worried that we would be traveling in the wrong direction. And my colleagues from the climate community, that we are very close with the climate community because they give us a lot of wisdom, because they have been fighting fights for longer against all solutions than us. And we have seen that the carbon neutral concept has rallied a lot of actors behind, but it's not taking us where it should be taking us. So maybe we need something stronger, we need something bolder, we need something that comes from the grassroots, and then everybody will rally behind, or we will make sure at least that we rally behind. Because for us, we do need a global goal and we need a travel direction, but it has to be a direction that leads us to avoid further destruction of nature and restore the ecosystems that are already degraded, but take serious actions, so the ones that are the drivers. It's a very powerful word you mentioned, Gabi. Drivers of biodiversity loss have to be effectively addressed, and we need to ensure that while this is done, we respect not only the rights, but the views of the grassroots and the main rights holders that are responsible of the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, which are indigenous peoples, local communities, women, and youth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minna. I think now, since we've had our opening remarks and we've got a good feeling of, where our concerns as young people come from, but also from where you're seeing this, maybe I could open it up for like a few comments on how you think, how would you respond to some of the concerns we have? Stephen, maybe you could go first.
Thank you for sharing. And one of the reflections I'm having perhaps the terminology of nature positive is relatively new on the scene, but the ideas that underpin it have been around for forever, right? We know that we need to take care of ourselves. We know that we need to take care of where we live. We know that we need to take care of others. None of those things are new for us as a society. But what seems to be coming out of this nature positive approach is a bit of a way to explain it in a simpler way and to use that as a rallying cry and a target to reach. But I think what's going to be really important to us is to draw back on that knowledge that we have individually and as a community and as society, um, to help guide us and remember what it is that we're trying to do. A lot of this is around the principles and the values that we hold, and not around numbers and targets and things like that. But that's an unfortunate reality in the world that we live in, that sometimes those are key elements that we use. And so I would encourage us to revisit some of those reflections and some of those ideas, and continue to bring them to the table. I think in terms of the desire and the need for consultation and interaction and listening, absolutely. But that applies to all aspects of society. And so we need to make a concerted effort to be listening and hearing and engaging with other parties. And that takes a lot of patience. It takes a little bit more time. But at the end of the day, we end up with a better product, a better direction, more of a level of consensus moving forward. So I think that's also something that I will take away from this, and an open invitation and a request to better understand how to engage with youth and be involved and make sure that it's not an afterthought. Oh, hey, wait, we forgot. But do that from the beginning of the process or even before the process begins. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Maybe, Michael, while you answer, we would like to hear from some of the things that our youth activists have actually mentioned about the fact that it's great to have this as a North Star for communicating to the rest of the audience, but bringing it into policy and such an early stage without proper consultation, without, as you said, not even asking young people or indigenous people their opinions. Why do you think there is this rush to put it in without having a clear definition or consultation beforehand in the post-2020 itself?
Right, thank you very much. And I think what is clear from the conversations that we've been having here right now, and I think Gavin said it quite clearly, that there is no time. We're here, we know that there is that urgency to act. I think that is a call that we're hearing from business, from youth, from all parts of society. The letter that Gavin mentioned, that 40 scientists have come out just this morning, clearly articulating that we need to halt and reverse nature loss by 2030. They've given that clear science evidence that this is sort of the deadline for which we need to act. So bringing that back to the concept of nature positive, and Gavin will be able to support me on this, the Global Goal group that are sort of the founding fathers of the concept, really speak to that same point, that the aim is for us all as society to really halt and reverse nature loss by 2030. So there seems to be some consensus around what we actually mean by nature positive, what we actually want to achieve, which is this halt and reverse nature loss. But I think where we start to have issues is the how to implement. And I think for business, this is also going to be a very important piece of the puzzle. We've been working with the business community to understand this. And I think, like I mentioned earlier, we are trying to help companies to clearly articulate that the global goal is a state that we want nature to be in. I think just drawing parallels from the climate net zero commitments that we're seeing from companies could be a little problematic, because we know that to get to nature positive, it's going to be the sum of all the actions, right? One company itself may not necessarily be able to be nature positive. So we are working with companies to be able to clearly articulate how they are contributing to a nature positive future. And I think that speaks to what somebody mentioned around the issues around offsetting and greenwashing. Nature positive is not equal to offsetting. I think that is something that we need to make very clear in this space, that nature positive as a concept respects the mitigation hierarchy, and that companies that are taking action need to first protect intact nature before even thinking about any sort of restoration. And the priority is really to reverse the halt nature loss before any extra action is taken. So I think that is a priority. And then, in terms of how this is being done, we have, been working with companies and partners such as the TNFD, SBTN, WWF, and a few others to really concretely understand what companies should do. We've come out with a framework, which is sort of the high-level entry framing for how companies can take action. And I'll quickly go through that. Companies, we're encouraging them to really start assessing their impact and dependencies on nature. So that's the A. The whole framework spells out ACT. D. So the A is assessing impact and dependencies on nature. And this is very critical because we were talking about creating a level playing field for companies to be able to now, all act respecting nature. This information that we get from all the assessments will be important for investors who are also investing into nature positive solutions. I think our colleagues that are representing, indigenous communities, tribes, getting access to some of this information will be able to help them understand the impacts these companies are having in their communities. It will empower them to be able to also really fight for their rights, understanding the exact impacts that companies are making. So the first is for companies to assess and disclose these impacts and dependencies. We need companies, after understanding these impacts, to be able to make the right science-based commitments. And I think Gavin mentioned that we're doing a lot of work with the Science-Based Targets Network to really help companies understanding this. But it doesn't end there. The real action is how they transform their businesses through circular economy principles, how they work to respect the mitigation hierarchy, preserving intact ecosystems. I know a lot of you have spoken to that. Nature positive is not a concept of balancing. We need to make sure that we are really halting and reversing the impact, the negative impacts that companies are having on nature. And this is the work that we as Business for Nature are doing with some of the leading companies. And just to end, I would like to say this issue of greenwashing, I think is a very important one that the business community is not also going to shun away from, because I think nothing undermines the credibility of business action than unsubstantiated claims. So we are working with companies to make sure that anything that they claim that they're doing on nature is at the very least verifiable, is in line with national policy and some of the international policies that are being discussed here, and that is able to be, companies are being able to be held accountable to those issues. So again, that is why we are working with companies to sort of step away from the claims that they're making as nature positive companies, but rather be very explicit about what they are doing to contribute to a nature positive future, whether it's zero deforestation, whether it's working on solving pollution issues in water stressed areas, being very specific on what you are doing so that can be tracked, that can be assessed, you can be judged specifically on that, and rather than saying you are a nature positive company. So I'm hoping that that kind of approach that companies are taking will help be very specific, and that companies can be held accountable to some of the specific actions that they're taking. And I hope that clarifies some of the issues that have been brought up.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, so maybe then, based on what you heard, I would like to open it to the youth to see if they would like to respond. Yeah.
What I think, maybe starting off with answering your first question, Sweta, was what we need, what do I need to be able to protect my community? And even though all of these conversations are very complex, all the policy making, especially understanding the different ecosystems and its relationship to biodiversity, for me it's very simple what I need. And what I need is to have companies stop coming to my territory trying to dig oil. And that is the most simple ask that indigenous communities have all around the world, is just let us be. Just stay out of our communities. It's not much more complex than that, than just stay out of our communities and let us do the work of restoration in our communities. We do know our land. In the rainforest, my community is the expert on how we can restore the land. That needs to be the priority. We need to take these companies out of our territories. And we definitely do understand the impact of companies in our territories. We understand them so well that we can trace back the value chain, we can trace back where it's being financed from, where the incentive is. We have a really big understanding of the companies' activities on our territories and everything that is involved in it. And I think when we're talking about even 2030, and we're talking about an extended deadline, right? It's almost like when you're in school and you've forgotten to like present your assignment like 4 times, and then it's like the last deadline of, okay, if you don't do this, like then you're out. And that's basically what we're facing in 2030. That's what we're facing, and we do not have 10 years to keep having loss of biodiversity. The loss that we will see in the next 10 years is something that we will not be able to reverse. It's something that cannot be replaced in any way. It's again, going back, I guess, like to the concept of nature. Nature and ecosystems are very different things. And I think one of the concerns that we've had is the definition of the word nature and the word positive, but especially talking about ecosystems. I can have nature in my community and I can have grass in my community, and that's still nature. But if I have a full ecosystem, that means that I have thousands and thousands of organisms and species in a very small area in these incredibly biodiverse places like the hotspots in the Amazon. That is what we are looking. That's what we are looking to save, and that's what we're looking to have and to restore, right? But if we're aiming to have nature in place, that can be basically anything. And I think that even in those places that have been deforested, that have had extractive industries, that have had carbon sinks, for example, destroyed, they would still, under the general concepts, be considered as nature. And that is problematic, because then we're not understanding, again, the complexity of these different ecosystems and their relationship to biodiversity. I think, as Mirna said, it's kind of these calculations, and I say what I said earlier, it's a language that doesn't apply on the ground. And if we're gonna speak the language of the ground, we got to speak the language of indigenous communities and the way that we have a relationship with nature, and the solutions that we are looking for. And I mean, we can go all into policy making and what type of policies we need in place to protect indigenous people's rights, to protect indigenous self-determination, and all of that. But the most simple thing, as I said, is just let us be, let us, our communities be, and we don't want any of those extractive industries or any type of industries in our communities. And something that really does concern me when it comes to, and what Archana was talking about, was the world's biodiversity, 80%, around approximately 80%, is under the custodianship of indigenous people, right? It's inevitable that indigenous people's territories are touched to make nature positive happen. It's something that we cannot, it's inevitable, because if 80% is under our territory, some of that territories need to be touched. and what are the impacts on indigenous people are going to be. There are really a lot of concerns about that, because we've seen that in traditional conservation, a lot of atrocities, even though they've not been intentional, have happened to indigenous people, and we do not want those same mistakes repeated. And I think that's why the human right angle in every single climate discussion, biodiversity discussion, is key to make sure that indigenous people's rights are respected, and as a domino effect, then biodiversity will also be preserved.
Thank you so much, Elena. Yeah. I'll now move to Aisha. We are coming close to the end of our really interesting panel, so I would like to request you guys to keep it a bit shorter. Thank you.
This is something that I was saying in the climate space as well, and this is something that I am urging you guys to also realize, from the businesses to the NGOs to civil society. You cannot negotiate with nature. You cannot put abstract numerics and abstract concepts on things that take time. And halting and reversing nature laws takes time. Yes, we are running out of it. But if the climate crisis is a train that is speeding really fast, and if biodiversity crisis is a train speeding really fast off of a cliff, one person cannot stop that train. And that, to me, is the equivalent of a definition or a solution that is quite right now empty. It has different definitions over the course of the hour. I've heard multiple different definitions. They are not all the same. So if one person is trying to stop that train will run that person over. We need to collectively come together to stop that train. And the other thing is, earlier, Stefan, you said that we need to engage all aspects of society to create a better product. The language of product really caught my attention, because from my cosmology, nature is not a product. Ecosystems cannot be easily put value on. Like, you cannot put dollar value on hundreds of thousands of species that sequester carbon, that keep the natural world alive, that feed each other. And if you want to put dollar value on that, that too will take time. It's not a 6-month thing. And we have to have that wisdom. We have to have that careful understanding. We have to be cautious. Last thing, you cannot negotiate with nature. I think we, over time and time again, think that we are on a hierarchy and we can teach nature. The thing about nature, it is quite powerful and it is quite strong. And from the culture that I grew up, we walk with humbleness in front of nature. We give nature the rite of passage. And I don't think we're giving nature the rite of passage. I think we're trying to control it. And that will fail.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think it's quite clear from our people that we really don't want to commodify nature, and that's something that is very clear even for young people, that it's not a commodity. We don't want to commodify it. It is something much more important. It is it's a part of who we are and our being, and it cannot have a price tag, and that's quite clear from what even Aisha mentioned. Maybe as we move to Gavin, very quickly, Gavin, if you could explain to us the finance. You mentioned that you wanted in the mission and in a few targets, and also with financing nature positive. We wanted to know, given this uncertainty, as we all discussed with the definition and everything, is it safe to really put financing nature positive into the policy text so soon? Maybe it's supposed to be something that is for a later conversation after we have thorough consultations done.
So first of all, I want to say there is a definition of nature positive at a global level. More nature in the world in the next decade than the last decade. There is also a paper that explains how you would go about measuring that as well. What there aren't yet are definitions of what that means in a site, in a territory, for a company. And it's complicated. We heard about the uniqueness of nature in different territories and different places around the world. And that's where there's an opportunity to co-create that definition. I think the guiding principle of the world in recovery and putting nature on a path to recovery should be, and we are ready to see that locked in. We hope it's locked into the Global Biodiversity Framework, but then there will be more work to be done. And there is more work to be done in co-creating this and working on this definition. In fact, I would say that the voices have given have been working on that already by raising your voice, raising your fears around offsetting, which make no sense. You can't take a beautiful old forest, trade it for a tree plantation, ignore the rights of communities, do not get free prior informed consent, and call that nature positive. It just doesn't, there's no way nature can recover globally if that's what companies, that's what people are doing around the world. So some definition needs further work, but the global idea, the global direction where we all need to be can be set, that we think. And we look forward to work with everybody to work through that as well. And I think I'll leave it. There might be one more point. Underneath Nature Positive, there's an awful lot that has to be done. And that is going on in the negotiation rooms here. What companies can do to help recover nature or destroy nature is being negotiated. Those negotiations are not going very well right now on the drivers of nature loss. We do need to spend more time criticizing bad ideas and pushing good ideas to ensure, for example, that we can really drastically reduce the footprint of consumption and production. That needs to happen underneath. This is not just about nature positive in the Global Biodiversity Framework. It's the actions underneath it that stand it up. That is here and needs to be agreed as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. Very quickly moving to Archana and Mirna. We are almost out of time. If you guys could keep it to 30 seconds, that would be really appreciated. Thank you.
Hello. I want to bring from a lens of climate while answering my intervention at this point of time. Is we all have been advocating to move away from fossil fuels to greener energy. And we know how critical it is for climate action. But at the same time, we indigenous people, local communities, our young people are also advocating that this transition to green energy and renewable energy does not repeat again the land grabbing, eviction in the name of solar energy and renewable energy. And that's why we have been talking about just transition. I would like to bring that advocacy and that perspective to here, saying that it's no longer a terminology, it's no longer a perspective which will happen. We have seen things happening on ground where in order to establish extractive developmental projects, the lands of indigenous people are taken away, communities are being evicted, and after the extractive developmental projects are being established, they are given the leverage to do plantation, restoration, and protection, which absolutely makes no sense because it is perpetuating and penetrating the biodiversity loss and then trying to recover and compensate it. And it's really important to see this in a lens that if this is something going to be their restoration projects, their initiatives of recovering biodiversity loss been seen as nature-based solutions, nature positives, then I think it's really, really problematic. And that's where I feel it's really critical for us to rethink that how this terminology and implementation will be undertaken by different stakeholders and how things will be guided. What is the process of accountability and transparency in this? And this needs to be ensured that this is not acting as another way of perpetuating the loss of biodiversity. We all are aware that we need to work towards biodiversity conservation and climate action, but I also want to end by saying this. In order to mitigate climate crisis, in order to adapt to climate crisis, we are pushing forward about this solution of nature-based solution, nature positive. But in a way, if these solutions are faulty, then we will again be perpetuating and causing climate crisis and biodiversity loss. And that's why I urge you all and seek your solidarity to advocate for intersectionality of climate action and biodiversity conservation. We cannot see these solutions in silos. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Archana. Yeah, Mirna, maybe just as your closing remarks to some of the things you've heard and maybe where the discussion needs to still happen, because I do think we've not heard some of the answers we were trying to get from this call panel, but we would love to keep the conversation going. So over to you, Mirna.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is really good as a start of a conversation, and we will be happy to keep having the conversation because there are many things that are still questions for us. For example, when Michael says nature positive is not offsetting, then we want to understand then why does it say in the measuring of the proposal of nature positive that by 2030 we would reach no net loss on biodiversity and nature positive from 2030 onwards. This no net loss goal would mean that there is some unavoidable loss of nature. That's what it says in the proposal. And this unavoidable loss of nature should be compensated. So this compensation for us is very close to offsetting, and it opens the door to understanding of offsetting. So these kind of things we think that they need further discussion. I think that we are not in disagreement that with the sense of urgency. I think that all of us that care about biodiversity, we feel the same sense of urgency. We just don't want to rally behind something that is not as legitimately consulted as my colleague said, and is not going to take us in a direction that is not ambitious enough. That's what happened in the climate process. So we want to go really ambitious, to really address the drivers, to really address the big fights that we need to fight, and to ensure that that the responsibles for the loss of biodiversity are going to be held accountable. We're happy to keep having this discussion. We're happy to rally behind halting and reversing biodiversity loss, and we're happy to have it on the mission. And if that is the definition of nature positive, then we're happy to have that, like the halt and reverse. But everything else that opens the door to further destruction of biodiversity, we don't want to rally behind that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the panel. We just have our last, yeah, thank you. Sorry, we just have some last closing remarks from Ami Ali from the ICCA consortium, who's just going to help us close with some reflections from what she's heard.
Thank you, Sweta, and thank you all for being here today. It's incredibly challenging to close this session, given the discussion, and hard for it to close. But I want to point out two things. This is the most attended session in this space, except for a session on finance. That's pretty incredible. And that's really hopeful. It's hopeful because I think this is the beginning of a real willingness to have hard conversations, to really work toward a transformative partnership, to really do what the planet needs us to do. And I think the fact that we are all here listening to these divergent opinions, to these hard conversations, to the fact that we are all calling for real systemic power change, that we don't want to be consulted, that we want to be there creating, co-creating. And I think it's essential that as we are about to adopt a post-2020 framework, we look past the words and we start being people positive. We first include the people. We make sure that those who are launching these types of movements that have very, very good intentions behind them have people around the table co-creating with them. And we, the ones who are on the ground, conserving these territories, are equal partners, are rights holders, are co-creators. We have the capacity to move things forward. It is really important that instead of trying to rally behind a term, we flourish in diversity. Flourishing diversity is essential. It's the only way we're going to have real impact worldwide. The way we solve things in Russia is not the way we solve things in Mexico. We have to remember that. The way we express things, like nature positive, very eloquently stated, is not the way we all perceive it. many times words come with really embedded meaning. And so I think it's essential that we continue these conversations, that we don't take this as the end. This is only the beginning. Extend the hand, work together, and let's really reimagine what we are doing and reimagine how we will do it. So thank you, Sweta. Thank you all for being here today. Please stick around, continue the conversations. Let's flourish in diversity. Let's reimagine together. And let's rally in diverse ways of solving the problem. Thank you all.
Thank you, Amiali, and thank you so much for everybody for joining us today. As we said, this is the beginning of a much longer conversation, and I hope we can take the words from what Amiali said and actually implement it in that way. So thank you, everybody, for being with us.